I am Nicole Rose Gellermino. I'm a teaching artist. Welcome to my project on printmaking from home. This video was made in partnership with the Luther Burbank Center for the Arts for their Let's Be Creative video series. What am I doing? I'm pushing objects into ink or paint and pressing them onto the paper. That's called stamping. I bet you've done stamping before. Stamping is a type of printmaking. Printmaking is any type of art process where you are transferring an image from one object to a paper or another surface. What kinds of objects am I using for my stamping? Fabric, cardboard, fruits and vegetables, yarn, leaves, and other objects. I'm just using things I found around in my home that have texture. Touch your hair. How does it feel on your fingertips? Fuzzy, curly, rough, prickly, smooth, coarse. All these things that we can feel with our fingertips have texture. And the objects that I'm using to stamp in my printmaking project all have texture too. The objects I'm using to stamp with all have something else really special. They are a relief. That means they have texture, but they're flat enough that I can press them against the page. What do you notice about the quality of the prints? The print is the image that shows up on the paper. They're rough. They're not super clear. Some are lighter than others, some are darker, some come out very clear. Does it look like I have a plan as I'm making this print? No, I don't have a plan. I'm exploring. I'm experimenting. I'm using a lot of different objects, testing them out to see which ones create what different types of effects. What do you notice about the arrangement of the prints of the stamping? Some are close together, some are far apart, some stamping is overlapped or layered. Lots of stamps are repeated over and over again to create a pattern. I'm really enjoying experimenting with these ordinary objects and finding out what kinds of marks they make with the paint and with the ink on lots of different types of paper. The objects that we introduce into art making can bring new meaning to a work of art. Let's look at Janine Antoni. I'm showing you a view of directly in Janine Antonio's website, which is linked below along with some videos in which he talks about the work. When you look at this photo, what do you see? You see a woman crouched down on the ground. Her hair is wet looking. There's black stuff that is squished all over the white floor. You'll notice a bucket behind her that also seems to be full and dripping of this black stuff. What could the black stuff be? Oil? Paint? You'll also notice people behind her. We can only see their legs and feet, and we notice that they are pushed up against the corner of the room. But there's also a little door on the upper left-hand corner. A clue to the meaning of this work is in the title, Loving Care. This piece was made in 1993. Loving Care is the name of a brand of hair dye that Janine Antoni's mother used. And the color of this particular hair dye is black. The stuff in that bucket is that hair dye, and that woman on the floor is the artist Janine Antoni. The space that is in is an art gallery, and the people behind her our audience or viewers of the artwork. She's doing performance art. That means that she is making artwork with her body instead of just with paint. However, she's also using paint, and in a way, she's making a print of her hair with the hair dye. When you see a bucket full of something wet and something very hair-like on the floor, what else might you think of? According to Janine and Antoni, painting or printing the floor using her body was also an act of mopping the floor. Instead of mopping it whiter, she mopped it darker. Who are people we traditionally think of doing mopping? The loving care hair dye and the mopping were both things that reminded Antoni of her mother. She also thought about how in the history of America and Europe, women are usually painted by men artists. In this artwork, she was the woman being painted and also the painter at the same time. Using an ordinary object to make artwork, she was able to question what we assume about art and gender. John Hitchcock also uses experimentation in printmaking to question our assumptions about people and culture. He combines images of real and imaginary animals with landscapes and language to tell a story of the indigenous people of Oklahoma and their struggle for survival and equity. He layers prints over prints. He prints onto papers curled into sculptures. He prints on boxes, on flags, and onto photographs. By experimenting with printmaking, Hitchcock is able to explore difficult stories in the history that we all share on this land. This is a view directly from John Hitchcock's website, which is linked below. You can learn more there about his work, or you can also learn from the video in which he talks about his work, which is linked below. With all this inspiration, it's time to gather the materials you need to work. First, you'll need a bunch of objects with relief. I like to use fruits and vegetables cut in half. That creates a cross-section that has texture but is flat. You'll want to take a paper towel and blot the objects to get the excess water out. They'll print better. You can also use crumpled foil, paper tubes, leaves. You can use the edges of the cardboard. You can also cut out shapes with cardboard and use them just as is, or you can also take shapes and glue them to another piece of cardboard to make a more traditional stamp. You can crumple up fabric, yarn, lots of nature objects like seeds. If you look around in your toys, you might find objects that have relief, and also any stamps that you happen to have. Peeling away a layer of cardboard often really reveals the corrugated part that can make an interesting texture. Another way you can make a stamp is by gluing a line on a piece of cardboard, letting it dry completely, and then printing it. Now it's time to gather our papers. Any smooth paper will do. It can be colored paper, printer paper, a paper bag, old paintings and drawing on smooth paper, pages from a voter guide or a newspaper, and this is newsprint. Finally, you'll need ink pads. Don't have any ink pads? Well, the best ink pads are actually homemade. I'll show you two different types, and there are links below for more step-by-step instructions from other artists about how to make ink pads. The first one I'll show you is made using sponges. You just need a tray, any shape of tray or plate that is flat on the bottom to put the sponge on. You can cut the sponge down to the shape or size you need it. Then you simply cover the sponge with tempera paint or poster paint. Acrylic paint also works, but it's very difficult to clean up. If you have a palette knife or a plastic knife, you can spread that paint more evenly to let it soak into the sponge. You really want the sponge completely full of paint. You can mix the colors as you go. These sponges are actually super thin sponges that I found at grocery outlet, but any sponges will do as long as they're clean. If you don't have paint, you can also cut pieces of felt, put them in a tray, and drop food coloring or egg dye onto them. You can add a couple drops of water or alcohol to spread the dye out. What can you do with all these prints you've made? Well, you can wrap a gift. You can also fold them and glue them into cards and envelopes by opening up an old envelope, tracing it, cutting it, and gluing it back together. You can use your prints as a background for a brand new painting, drawing, or a collage. And finally, if you have any prints on a large piece of paper, they can be a beautiful placemat for a special meal. And let's not forget that the best way to really admire a beautiful work of art is to hang it in your very own art gallery at home. If you enjoyed this project, visit us again next Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. for another Let's Be Creative video with the Luther Burbank Center for the Arts.